Welcome to Observations, an open conversation about women's health. This is a space where physicians, patients, and other experts can sit down and have honest, evidence-based dialogue that cuts through the media bias and brings clarity back to maternal care and how we can care for both patients, mother and preborn child. With each episode, we will have real stories, real science, but also real questions about women's health today. From clinical insights to lived experiences, to aligned perspectives, and yes, also respectful disagreements. This is our goal, to bridge the gap between physician and patient, to empower informed decision-making, and bring back and elevate compassionate, fact-driven care. Now, a quick note before we dive in. Not every guest on the podcast is going to represent the views or positions of Applog, but we believe that having open and honest conversations are going to make us better. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into today's observation.
Welcome. I'm your host for today, Dr. Christina Francis, the CEO of Applog, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. And I'm so happy to welcome as our guest today, Katy Faust, who we've had on before, but it's been a little while. And we're here at our national conference where Katy has agreed to be a speaker yet again this year. So Katy, thank you so much for joining us not only on the podcast, but here at the conference as well.
Not a chore. It's not a chore.
So glad to
Either
have
being
you.
like on site talking to all your wonderful people or your online audience. It's a joy because what you guys are doing is so important. You know, we have to take these child-centric truths back into the medical space that has seemed to have forgotten like what they're really about, especially as it relates to the least of these. Yeah. So I just love being with all of you guys in your mission and follow your work, and very grateful.
Thank you so much. We the feeling is mutual for sure. So for those of our listeners that aren't aware of who you are, Katy is founder and president of Them Before Us, which is a global movement defending children's right to their mother and their father. You publish widely, you speak and testify on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. I have to say that Katy's book, Them Before Us, the same title as your organization, is a must read. It really changed the way I thought and think about a lot of these issues. You really just lay things out in a way that I think many people have probably never thought through them. So it really is a must read if you want to understand truly how the cultural changes that have happened in this country, but around the world really in the last century that have led to overall the breakdown of the family, how that has impacted children. And so I really would encourage people to read your book and go to the website, and we'll talk about that more later, but to really truly understand how many things in our culture are focused on the needs and desires of adults at the expense of children.
Yeah, well, thank you. We definitely designed that book. I co-authored it with Stacey Manning, and what we wanted to do is look at all of these different issues that people think, well, what does cohabitation have to do with surrogacy? And, you know, what does third-party reproduction have to do with the definition of marriage? And what we wanted to do is to say, you can look at all of these different issues and think, well, these are not connected at all. But really, they all have something in common, and that is when we get the answers wrong, children are victimized. So we try to center the child in all of those conversations. What is marriage? Should we encourage IVF? Who is adoption for? Is polygamous and open non-monogamy just more adults to love a child? I mean, like, we really want to take all of these conversations that tend to obsessively focus on adult desire, longing, losses, identity, feelings, and center it on the concrete, non-negotiable rights and needs of the child, specifically their right to life and their right to their mother and father. And when you focus on the child, you get answers to all of those questions in the personal space and in the policy space.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great way to encapsulate what that is about. And I know that you and I have talked about this in the past, and I've heard you talk about this, but so much in the pro-life movement, we do focus on, yes, that child from the moment of fertilization is a human being deserving of protection and respect, and we have to take care of them. But then there's so much beyond that as well that really falls I think under the life issue, but looking at then what comes after that and how do we best protect them throughout their childhood. I know that from talking to you that this isn't necessarily something that 30 years ago you would have foreseen that you would be involved in. Can you tell us just briefly what brought you to this point, and how did you get to the point where now you are one of, I would say, the foremost child rights advocates out there and really talking on a huge public stage about it?
Yeah. Why am I doing this? I just got enraged one day. I had, my husband has been in ministry forever, pastor's wife, stay-at-home mom. We had just gotten home from China adopting our youngest. And I was very busy, I was very tired. And I also am much more of a grace giver than a truth teller. Like I would rather keep my friends. I'm not one of those people that just wants to go out and like tell everybody what I think about everything. I generally am like, if you're not asking for my advice, that's fine, live as you want. Like let's just go to coffee together. Like that's really where I'm at when you're not victimizing kids. But what I heard, especially on the marriage issue, when Obama evolved on the topic of marriage in 2012, I heard a sea change in the media, and I heard this amping up of propaganda as it relates to families with two mothers and two fathers. In essence saying kids love having two moms and two dads. And I was like, well, hold on there. Because I've been working with kids in a variety of capacities for 20 years, whether it's youth ministry. I used to be the assistant director of the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. I've been a child. I have children in my home now. Their friends are also in my home. I just stopped running the youth ministry at church like 2 years ago. I have a lot of contact with kids. I had never met a child who lost their mother or father that was like, awesome, love this, good for me. But that's what you're saying when you're promoting two mother or two father homes. You're promoting intentional mother and father loss. So that's what got me into this, sort of a, how dare you weaponize some of the deepest wounds that children experience, not through tragedy, but intentionality, to push a political narrative. And I didn't hear in the marriage space very many people speaking up on behalf of the child in those conversations. The marriage conversation seemed to, on the left, be dominated by people saying, well, this is about adult equality. Well, this is our civil right. Well, this is about whether or not we have dignity. And it was very gay protective. And then on the right, I didn't hear a child-centric argument from many. It was more of a, but if we get gay marriage, religious rights are going to be impacted. We're going to have to, maybe our 501c3 is going to be in jeopardy. I'm like, stop talking about adults.
Right.
Like, when we get these questions wrong, it is not gay adults who are the victims or Christian adults who are the primary victims. It is children who are the victims. So I began writing about marriage being a matter of justice for children, and very quickly realized that if I believed that children needed their mother and father, and that was the primary vector for their protection, their thriving, and their identity formation, that divorce was a big problem, and that the rise of cohabitation as a replacement for marriage was a big problem. And that took me into the world of reproductive technologies, where I was like, oh, it's not just the cultural changes that are denying children their mother and father. It's the technological advancements that are now cutting children's mother or father out of their life at the moment of fertilization. And then that led me to understanding the legal challenges that are taking place that are rendering children as functional accessories, changes in marriage law, changes in parenthood law. And all of it just kind of was like, okay, we just need a whole movement. We just need somebody advocating for children's fundamental natural rights in the cultural space and in the courtrooms, because kids, just like the pro-life issue, kids can't defend themselves. They are too weak, they're too dependent, they're vulnerable. It has to be adults who step up and speak out on their behalf. So 15 years ago, I wasn't doing any of this. I didn't know anything about surrogacy. I didn't know anything about IVF. I had never met a donor-conceived person. But this mission of child protection demanded that I start learning about all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting that what drew you into all of this was the debate over marriage, because I remember before the Obergefell decision and when all of that was going on, you're right, there wasn't talk about children, because it was just that these two people should have a right to be married just like those two people. But in that discussion, not only did the rights of children not come up, but they weren't talking about, but then what do married couples typically want? whether it be two men or two women or a man and a woman, they typically then will want children. So then what happens when you have a relationship that by definition cannot procreate without additional technologies.
Right.
And of course that was going to be a natural outcome, right? As we go down this cultural road.
You would think that we would go, of course, that's a natural outcome, but you would be forgiven if that did not necessarily rise to the surface of your newsfeed, because they had to redefine marriage on the understanding that procreation really was not an important part of that relationship. Otherwise, you could never have gay marriage.
Right.
And so you had to push the redefinition of marriage based on, well, this isn't about children. I mean, and that we heard that all the time. Well, if infertile couples can get married, I mean, that's obviously not about children. So why can't two men or two women get married? So they pushed it based on this isn't about children. And then they got Obergefell and turned around and said, now give us kids.
Right.
And that's what happened. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a complete overhaul of parenting law to deliver children to, in essence, unrelated adults in the name of adult equality. There is a direct line when you look at how parenthood law has been changed because of Obergefell. There's a direct line between gay marriage and child commodification. And we can talk more about that if you want, but it's an injustice. Like, we have reordered our understanding, not just of marriage, not just of parenthood, but of the human child, because we exalted adult identity in the institution of marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that bridges very nicely into what you're here at the conference to talk about, which is surrogacy. Obviously, many of us probably know someone who either was born because of surrogacy or was a surrogate.
Especially you guys.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I have actually a couple of good friends who have been a surrogate in the past. And I know what their motivation was. Their motivation was they really wanted to help this family be able to have a baby. And so I think for a lot of people, their motivation in being a surrogate is a very good motivation. They desire to be helpful. They love families, they love children, they want families to be able to have children. And so I say that as a caveat to say, I know that is the motivation of a lot of people, but we have definitely seen this crazy rise in surrogacy in the US since the Obergefell decision, because now we need surrogates to be able to carry children for these couples who cannot have children. Why, though, even if the intention is good, even if the intention is, let's say someone says, okay, what if we don't do surrogacy for homosexual couples? What if we just do surrogacy for, a marriage between a man and a woman that they cannot have a child on their own for whatever reason? Even if those motivations are good, what are the ethical problems that are still there, particularly as it impacts the child?
Yeah. So I should probably know this. You're an OB?
Yes.
So sorry, I should know. So you care for the mother while she's pregnant, and then are you involved at all in the days after birth or the weeks after birth, or do you immediately hand them off to the pediatrician? Or are you ever
for a baby?
Yeah.
Yeah, we immediately hand them off. So lots of people are like, "Oh, you're a baby doctor." Yes, I am, up until the point they're born.
Right.
Yes, then I hand them off. But yes.
Well, I would be interested to know if you have an answer to this, and if you don't, that's fine. What is the best practice for right after delivery? What is it that you do right after delivery for the baby?
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as baby comes out and doesn't need immediate interventions, because they're really struggling, the best place for that baby is right up on mom's belly and then chest once we cut that umbilical cord. Yeah. Absolutely. And even actually for babies who are born who are struggling a little bit, sometimes they have something called transient tachypnea of the newborn where they're breathing really fast. They just need to regulate their breathing, or they need to regulate their body temperature. The best place for them is actually skin to skin with mom. That actually, mom's body actually helps regulate baby's body.
So what if we put the baby on your body instead? Yeah. What would that do?
Would not have the same effect at all. There's this very unique connection between mom and baby.
What if that birth mother is not the genetic mother, and the genetic mother is in the chair in the corner, and she has her shirt off, and you put the baby on her chest? Like, what is the impact on the child? Do you know?
I don't know if I could tell you exactly. There would still be there's some benefit because dads can do, skin to skin as well. So there is some benefit of maybe temperature regulation. there, but you definitely do not get the same benefits. In fact, there's this amazing phenomenon that happens actually where babies will actually, when they're hungry after they're born, they actually will migrate towards mom's breasts because they know that that's where they're supposed to go. And that's not going to happen with anybody else. It actually happens through this chemical connection that they have with one another because of the pregnancy.
Because I believe the smell of the breast milk is the same smell as the oh my gosh, the fluid that there's...
The amniotic fluid.
Amniotic fluid,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so what I've seen in terms of why is that we put the baby on the mother's chest, it is not so they can form a bond. It's because they have an existing bond.
Yeah.
Because they're already connected.
Absolutely.
And if that woman is not genetically related, the baby doesn't know, and the baby does not care. The baby wants her voice and her smell, her body, her milk. It is her body. You're right, skin to skin has benefits when it's a human, but no benefits like that woman.
Absolutely.
I think that they've done tests on, skin to skin when people are holding the baby and they do the heel prick, and the baby on that mom's, the birth mom's body feels less pain than the baby on somebody else's body.
Yeah.
Right? There's something about that bond.
Yeah.
So newborns cannot talk to us. They cannot share how they are feeling. What we know is cortisol levels are the lowest and the most even when they're on with the birth mother. Yeah. So that tells us something. It tells us that that bond that they have formed for 9.5 months with that woman does something for them, especially in the first few days and weeks and months of life that no other person can do, even if that woman's not genetically related. I argue a lot online. I argue a lot about surrogacy online, and I will critique surrogacy arrangements, whether it's commercial or altruistic, whether it's going to a homosexual couple or a heterosexual couple, whether the people receiving the baby are the genetic parents or genetic strangers. And people will say, the baby doesn't know any different. And I'll say, the baby knows nothing else.
Right.
The baby knows nothing else. That is the only thing the baby knows. So what surrogacy does from the from the adult's perspective, you can have a selfless surrogate who says, my best friend can't get pregnant, I want to help her. That best friend can be so grateful that her friend is going to carry the baby. There are lawyers that are happy with this. There are egg sellers that are very happy with this because, hey, they're paying off their college loans. Obviously, intended parents, be they male or female, are very happy that they have found somebody to gestate for them for hire because the vast majority of these arrangements will involve compensation. Very few women offer themselves as a high risk, what is always a high risk pregnancy, for free. This is why we've seen commercial surrogacy legislation pushed in a variety of states, not because surrogacy was illegal, but because women would not do it without being paid. And so what you've got from the adult's perspective is they can all be very happy about this. The people selling eggs and buying eggs, the people serving as surrogates, and the people taking the children home. The adults are often very, very happy. Surrogacy is always an injustice to the child. And I'll tell you the way to properly think about surrogacy from the child's perspective. Surrogacy takes what should be one person, mother, and splices that person into 3 optional items. So the first one is the genetic mother who offers her egg, half of the child's genetic identity, one of 2 people in the world that will help the child answer the question, who am I, when they're wondering and longing. The second mother is the one with whom we form that critical bond for the first 9.5 months of life. And she sets the foundation for trust and attachment in the future. And then the third mother is the woman who kisses you every day, wears you around the house, the one that sits and listens during your breakup as a 7th grader, the one who tends to help you develop your fine motor skills through her natural interactions with you versus dad who develops your gross motor skills. It is the one that fills the child with the distinctly feminine love that they crave. And so we look at these 3 mothers, the genetic mother, the birth mother, and then the social mother, and we say, which one's optional? Right? Which one does the child not need? Because from the child's perspective, you're always losing mother number 2. You will always lose the birth mother. Very often, you'll also lose the genetic mother. And sometimes you'll go back to a house where there's no mother at all, and you lose all three. They've split them into three, and you get none of them. And it's interesting because people will say, but how important is the birth mother anyway? I mean, no big deal. The child's just going to bond to their genetic parent. And to that, I say it's really hard to know the impact of mother loss from the time of birth, because we actually are not allowed to study it in humans. We can't conduct studies on infants by separating them from their mothers because we've decided it's too cruel. So we don't do those experiments.
And yet we do it.
And yet we do it through commercial surrogacy on the reg and call it progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you know, you bring up a very important point in that this is a commercial industry now. As you said, very few times does this happen without the exchange of money. It is illegal to traffic children, to sell children to someone. Even in adoption situations, you have to be extremely careful with, obviously, payments are involved in adoptions as you're paying attorneys and maybe paying adoption agencies. But I mean, you're an adoptive parent. I have an adopted sister. My best friend has 2 adopted children. I know very well you have to be very careful that there is no actual, transaction that happens, and no appearance even of a transaction happening there. And yet, each and every day in this country, more and more so, there are people, oftentimes from other countries, or people here in this country, that are literally paying for the sale of a child to them. Tell us a little bit more about, because I think there'd be a lot of people who would be appalled to know the level to which this is happening right now.
This is a really important point. We're going to talk about it in my session too, because I'm going to talk about why surrogacy violates 3 fundamental rights of children. It violates their right to life, it violates their right to their mother and father, and it violates their right to be born free and not bought and sold. And I'm going to contrast that with adoption, because as an adoptive mom, we paid a lot of money during our adoption. And surrogate parents pay a lot of money for their surrogate pregnancy. So what is the difference between the two? The difference is, and I know this because one of my jobs at the Chinese Adoption Agency 20 years ago was ensuring compliance with international, federal, and state level standards. And the bright red line as it related to adoption was there is going to be a lot of money that's changed hands in this process, but never will money ever go from intended parents to the birth mother, or the intended parents to the first family, in exchange for relinquishing parental rights. If that were to happen, it is no longer adoption. It is trafficking. So the money that we paid went to our home study, the social worker to check us out several times, check us up after we got home with him. It went to the adoption agency that was ensuring compliance. It went to the FBI to fingerprint us. It went to travel organizations so we could go to China to pick him up. It went to the orphanage for the care that he had received. It went to the US government to make sure that we were bringing him into the country legally. We spent a lot of money, like most people do. 0 of it went to our son's birth family, because that would be illegal. What happens in surrogacy? It's built on direct payments to genetic fathers, genetic mothers, and birth mothers. In 100% of cases, when you hand over that vial of sperm, you're signing an agreement promising that you will have no involvement in this child's life. Give me $400, I promise to relinquish my parental rights. It's the same thing with egg donors, right? Nobody's donating. You are selling the rights of your child, whoever wants to make a baby with your genetic material. That's what happens in commercial surrogacy too. It's interesting because all around the country, every state has adoption laws. Those adoption laws can vary. There is no state in the country that allows a birth mother to relinquish her parental rights before the baby's born. They presume that the mother has a claim to the child. They presume that mother and baby go together. Some states will allow her to then surrender her parental rights a couple days. Sometimes they'll say, you have to wait 3 weeks because we're going to presume that you guys belong together. In surrogacy, we now have pre-birth orders where the woman will relinquish her rights to the child in the 2nd or 3rd trimester for money. it is so black and white and obvious that this is not a benevolent nonprofit that is helping infertile couples have children. Some of them may be infertile, and some of them, I'm sure, are wonderful parents. But this is trafficking,
Right.
according to the international understanding that we've been going by based in the adoption world for 4 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and not only are children being sold, I mean, that's exactly what's happening. Children are being sold. Also, the people that are purchasing the children are not going through the same scrutiny that adoptive parents are. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Part of this is surrogacy. You know, I've talked a lot about, there's been, well, every week there's a new horrifying surrogacy case.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it is the Chinese billionaire who has 100 surrogate-born children from California that he's now raising in a high-end high-end nursery in China, or the Californian couple that mass-produced children and had 21 kids in their California mansion, 15 of which were under the age of 3, or the 74-year-old man that procured surrogate twins who were 6 years old at the time, and he was investigated because he was keeping them in cage-like conditions, or the UK pensioners that have acquired surplus embryos, gestated them in a surrogate, and took them back to Britain to, in essence, raise their own caregiver. All of these people, like, what does adoption do?
Right.
It places children based on the child's best interest. There is no best interest of the child language anywhere in surrogacy contracts. It doesn't even factor into the decision. It is, what does the adult want? We will give them the product they have ordered. And like you said, there is no background checks. There's no screening. We already have several cases of pedophiles who have attempted to or already acquired children through surrogacy, a child that biology would never give them,
Right.
and adoption would never give them.
Right.
This is the predator's workaround. And it's completely legal. Not only is it completely legal, it's celebrated as a pathway of adult equality. So it's something that we have to get very serious about, not just the technological advances that make children these sort of free radicals that can attach to whoever, but also the legal systems that are complicit in giving their stamp of approval on this kind of child commodification.
Yeah, absolutely. It is horrifying. I mean, and even just recently, I remember hearing a story about a woman who was serving as a surrogate and was diagnosed with a cancer during her pregnancy, and that was likely going to necessitate an early preterm delivery, but a delivery at a time when the baby could survive, but would likely have some health struggles,
Right.
or at least, not an easy road after delivery. And the 2 men who were purchasing the baby from her, who had made that arrangement, wanted her to have an abortion because they didn't want to have a child with potential handicaps. And she wanted that child to have life, but had absolutely zero rights over that child.
That's right.
And that child then had no one who was legally able to protect him or her. I can't remember if it was a boy or girl. But really, really horrific situations that we have created for ourselves.
That's right.
and how we've set up this legal system. Not to mention the fact that oftentimes the women that are serving as surrogates, yes, they may be receiving payments, and people might try to make judgment statements about that, but oftentimes these are women that are in very desperate circumstances themselves, who see this as a way of being able to survive or maybe provide for their other children that they already have, who are really being taken advantage of as well in this situation. I know we're running up on time, but I did want to bring up one thing because this was something that I found myself sort of not struggling with, but how do I think through this? When we talk about, taking a child away from his or her biologic parent and putting them with unrelated parents, whether that be a man and a woman, 2 men, 2 women, and some could argue, well, the exact same thing happens with adoption.
Yep.
You have a child that's taken away for whatever reason, whether their parents die or they're taken out of that circumstance from their biologic parents, and they're placed with 2 parents who are not related to them. So how is this different? Obviously, you've done a lot of research on this, but also as an adoptive mom, how would you respond to that? What is that major difference there?
So what's the same? What's the same is the child experiences a primal wound. They have been wounded. It is a wound that goes down to the core of what it means to be a human child. And very often, there are manifestations of that wound throughout life, whether it's a surrogate-born child or an adoptee. And what do those wounds look like? Adoptees tend to be raised by adults who are better educated, wealthier, spend more time with them than the average biological parent. have more stable marriages, and yet adoptees disproportionately struggle with externalizing disorders, with academic challenges. And here's another thing too. Children who lose their mothers early, whether they're subsequently adopted or they're just abandoned, many of them report fear of abandonment in all the rest of their relationships. And like this petrified, oh, they're gonna leave me, they're gonna leave me. And so they often will be sort of obsessive with their friends or their partners or their spouses.
Sure.
They have this, I need to have as much of you as I can, don't leave me. And that is incredible to me, the number of people. Even I was talking with a woman whose mother left when she was 3. And she said, I heard you talk about surrogacy. And I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I felt that way all my life.
Wow.
I thought everybody did.
Uh-huh.
But when my father would go out the door with my stepmother, who I loved, I would think they're never coming back, they're never coming back, even as a 9-year-old, even as a 12-year-old. And so there is something that goes down to the core of the child that makes them insecure in their attachments in the future. So that is true. Those things are the same. You lose your birth mother, and you are set up for more struggles when it comes to trust and attachment. That is where the similarities end. That is the last thing that surrogacy and adoption have in common. Because the big difference is, in both of these scenarios, the child has experienced a wound. But in the case where the child is being raised by adults that commissioned them through a third party, somebody else's sperm or egg or womb, the child is going to experience that loss and that grief and that struggle. But if they voice it, they are talking with the people who inflicted the loss. So the child tends to be isolated in their grief. And they have, when they do voice it, what they often hear, they'll say something like, I really would like to know the identity of my father, or I wish I had a dad like the other kids. And what they often hear is, well, yeah, but aren't you just grateful to be alive? I mean, you wouldn't be alive without this technology. Do you know how much we went through to have you? I mean, I see these women who have their newborns on Instagram, you know, these little wrapped up newborns with rows of needles and rows of needles and rows of needles, like circling them. Look at what I did to get this baby. You know, some of it's just IVF. Some of it ends up, you know, later being a surrogate. Sometimes it's well, we had to use an egg donor, but look at what I did to have you. And that is very often used against the child. Like, you can't complain because we went through so much. So what that means is the child still has the loss, they still have the grief, they still have the questions, they just process it in isolation. Whereas the child that is in the adoptive home, and I understand there were times where this wasn't the case, you know, for kids that were adopted in the 70s or 80s or maybe even 90s, they didn't have the same level of permission to express some of their struggles. They were worried about hurting the feelings of their adoptive parents. That is not generally the message that is sent to adoptive parents these days. Now, if a child voices that, it's hard for me not to look like anybody else in the house, or do you know why my mother abandoned me? They're not talking to the person that wanted their mother gone. They're talking to the person that's seeking to mend the wound and step into that gap. So they're now in a place to process it through in community with somebody that can empathize and understand, who will try to work to heal it. So that's just one of the many, many differences between these two situations. But it is true that I think that people on the right, especially pro-lifers, have spent so much time worrying that if we talk at all about the downsides of adoption, we'll drive women to abortion. But that does adopted children, birth mothers, and adoptive parents a disservice.
I think so too.
Because adoption is redemptive and incredible, but it often doesn't solve everything. And you need to be able to talk honestly about that for the sake of the child, I would say especially.
And the parents, I think.
Totally.
You know, having gone through this with my best friend, who, you know, as I said, has 2 adopted children, it is a struggle at times, and I think it's good to have those open and honest discussions, and to recognize, you know, as we wrap up this topic today, as we recognize that that is an attempt to heal a wound that had been inflicted versus intentionally inflicting that wound on the child, who then has to process it on their own. Katy, thank you so much for the work that you are doing with very difficult topics, but bringing awareness to them and really championing the rights of children. Thank you for the work that your organization is doing. If people want to know more, there's so much more for them to hear. Where can they go to find out more?
If you go to thembeforeus.com, you can subscribe. We have a Substack where twice a week we try to equip you on all of these questions about marriage and family reproduction, whether it's like, how do I debate this in the public space, or how do I live in such a way to love the lesbians next door without compromising. Come and just let us equip you to defend children, to think properly about marriage and family from a child-centric perspective. I promise we won't spam you, but we want people to be equipped. Like, we want you to be able to speak with confidence about these matters, because very real children are on the line.
Absolutely.
And like, we can't defend what we don't understand. So we really want to make sure that everybody understands these fundamental rights that children have and how they apply to all these conversations that I know everyone's already having.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Katy, so much for joining us. It was a really wonderful conversation. I look forward to even more conversations in the future.
Yeah, me too.
And thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back here next week on Observations.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Observations and that it broadened your perspective on women's health and how we can care for both patients, mother, and preborn child. If you like this episode, make sure to give us a 5-star review where you can find your podcasts. Make sure that you like this on YouTube and subscribe to our channel for more episodes coming up. And if you have any suggestions on any topics that we should cover or guests that we should have on, make sure that you email us at media@applog.org. Again, thank you for joining us for today's observation, and we'll see you in our next episode.